The Vietnam War and the push for US involvement was a result of the Gulf of Tonkin incident. A lie. The Iraq War famously is a result of lies. Wars in Somalia are a result of lies. The Second World War and the German invasion of Poland was a result of carefully constructed lies. That is war by media. Let us ask ourselves, of the complicit media, which is the majority of the mainstream press, what is the average death count attributed to each journalist?
Right, that was Anton Karas, the third man. I know you're tired of hearing that because you already know. And that was Julian Assange from a anti-war demonstration in 2010. I'm Randy Credico. This is Randy Credico, Assange Countdown to Freedom, but also Randy Credico Live on the Fly. And earlier today, I interviewed John Pilger on my WBAI Live on the Fly radio show. And it was in the middle of a fundraising drive. So what we've done today, my very creative, hardworking engineer, editor out of North Carolina, Kelly Lane, has agreed to take what we had between me and John and to put that out there, just our interview with just a couple of different changes, and that's about it. Let me just say, first of all, my heart goes out to the friends and family of Kevin Zeese, who was a great activist and friend of mine. We will miss him, particularly at this point in time. So that being said, this is about the trial that's taken place, or the proceedings, the hearing, the extradition hearing of Julian Assange in London, which started again Monday, and now it is Wednesday. So after 3 days, we tracked down John Pilger in London, and we had this really nice 35-minute interview with him, and we decocted all of the stuff that surrounded it and made it into a short video here. So let's just get right into it. We're going to, and by the way, John Pilger is the greatest journalist to walk the face of the planet, hands down. Seriously, he's won more awards than anybody. He's got 61 films that you can get on his website, johnpilger.com, and also at the British Library. All of his stuff is archived there. So it's an amazing, unparalleled body of work. And I suggest that if you have children during this lockdown and not going to school, have them watch these films going back to 1970 with Vietnam and all the way up to the war on the NHS, and which I'm not sure it's on there on the website, but I do know you can get it at Bullfrog Films. But everything else up to the coming war on China. John Pilger is, like I said, a very dear friend of Julian Assange. He's done about 25 interviews with me. He's been very generous, and I have nothing but the highest admiration for John Pilger. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to play the interview after June Tabor, who Julian Assange said, "You've got to play June Tabor's version of the band played, and the band played Waltz and Matilda," which we're going to do, and then we'll get into John. And at the end of it, and this is Martha Gellhorn, who is a close friend of John Pilger, and he is one of the, he runs the Gellhorn Funds award show, and Julian Assange is a recipient. So at the end, she made her bones big during the Spanish Civil War. At the end, we're going to play Leonard Cohen The Partisan. It's about the Spanish Civil War. So when that's over, that's it. So when John's done, it's going to go into The Partisan and by Leonard Cohen, and the show's over. Okay, but enjoy this show, and we'll see you very soon. Thank you.
When I was a young man, I carried me pack, and I lived the free life of the rover. From the Murray's green basin to the dusty outback, I waltzed my Matilda all over. Then in 1915 the country said, son, it's time to stop rambling, there's work to be done. And they gave me a tin hat and they gave me a gun, and they sent me away to the war. And the band played Waltzing Matilda as our ship pulled away from the quay. Amidst all the cheers, the flag waving and tears, we sailed off to Gallipoli.
As promised, let's get right into it. Thank you, John, for the patience.
Okay, Randy, good to be on the program again after these years.
Yes, John. I was just talking about we did this way back. This program, which we call the Assange Countdown to Freedom, started on April 4th, 2017. You and Julian were on the same show, and it's been such a Sisyphus type of procedure for Julian. I mean, just when we think there's some light at the end of the tunnel, there's another tunnel. Can you give us a recap of this week, what happened in London, and then give us a pre-cap leading up to it?
Randy, come on, that's asking for the history of the world. But I'll give you just my thoughts of what has happened this week. We're now on day 3 of the extradition hearing being held at the Central Criminal Court in London, known as the Old Bailey, and the proceedings are following pretty much as they did before, with bias, a kind of presence in the courtroom. The judge, or magistrate as she really is, Vanessa Baraitser, has demonstrated her preferences in this case very early on, and this is no different. We've seen the defense has brought forward people like today Professor Paul Rogers of Bradford University, who began the Peace Studies department at Bradford. He suggested that really all this was about, or one of the reasons that this was happening to Julian, was Trump taking personal revenge, if you like, on Obama, that Obama had not prosecuted over the years he was in power, 8 years. He had not prosecuted Julian, he had not prosecuted WikiLeaks. Chelsea Manning had been prosecuted, and many others. In fact, ironically, Obama had holds the record as a president for prosecuting whistleblowers. But according to Professor Bradford, and I think it was probably an opinion more than anything else, but it's interesting that such is the personal animosity that Trump feels towards Obama, that the prosecution of Julian Assange is about a personal war between Trump and Obama. Now, I don't know whether that's true or not. I think it has some credibility, certainly, because Washington is really a series of turf battlegrounds. And there's no doubt the prosecution of Assange came largely from some of the more extreme people that Trump brought into the administration, such as Pompeo. Pompeo is as close to a fascist as you can get, and I don't use that word very much, but I think he is. He's a religious fanatic, and he made it very clear when WikiLeaks published the Vault 7 files that really showed that the CIA was spying on everybody, and they could spy on you through your television set. It was an extraordinary achievement for WikiLeaks to get these files, and they did a great public service. But it was also unforgivable, and Pompeo made that very clear in a now infamous speech in which he described Assange as a non-state hostile actor.
John, we actually have a clip, I think. Reggie, we have a clip of that,
Yep.
that short. Put that on. It's only like 20 seconds, if you could.
Okay.
By Pompeo.
Hold on.
This is Pompeo from
It's time to call out WikiLeaks for what it really is. A non-state hostile intelligence service often abetted by state actors like Russia. We know this because Assange and his ilk make common cause with dictators today. Yes, they try unsuccessfully to cloak themselves and their actions in the language of liberty and privacy, but in reality, they champion nothing but their own celebrity. Their currency is clickbait, their moral compass non-existent, their mission, personal self-aggrandizement through destruction of Western values.
All right, there you go, John. You can continue.
Well, everything that Pompeo says there is absurd, but it is the language of the big lie in the 21st century. All that stuff about American values. Earlier on, Randy, you asked me to give you something of the backstory. Well, the backstory is in those two words, American values. America is the problem. The United States is the problem. And I'm not talking about vaguely esoteric terms like exceptionalism. I'm talking about Americanism. It has been endangering the world for most of my lifetime, and here we have just released from Brown University an exhaustive new report co-authored by Professor David Vine, in which, and I know David Vine, in which the report conservatively estimates that 37 million people, the equivalent to the entire population of Canada, have been forced to flee their home country or have become internally displaced within the 2 decades of an unending US war called the War on Terror, and that the numbers of people, he's saying this is a very conservative estimate, the real number of people displaced by United States actions, by United States invasions, and by so-called American values, I have to say, is probably closer to 48 to 59 million people dislocated across the world. And of course, he gives various estimates, all of them very conservative, of millions of people who have died during this. This is the kind of suffering. This is the kind of human suffering that has happened under the rubric of American values, which is so well represented by Pompeo and Trump, and before them by Obama, who conducted 7 wars of aggression, and so on and so forth. So Julian Assange took this monster on. That's it in a nutshell.
Yeah.
WikiLeaks took it on with truth. The interesting thing about WikiLeaks is that it holds an absolutely unique record, that all its disclosures are authentic, 100% authentic. Now, throughout my own career, I've had a number of what we call business still rather romantically scoops, but to make sure those scoops were authentic is the hard bit. All of WikiLeaks' scoops, one after the other, of telling millions of people across the world how the powerful behave and misbehave and lie in their name. That's what they've done. Now that's intolerable to the likes of Pompeo, who really is at the far extreme, putting aside right wing here. It's an extreme that's a kind of lunar extreme, where you have a state of permanent war, often articulated by Pentagon generals such as Petraeus. Permanent war. That's what they represent. Julian Assange and WikiLeaks exposed them. They exposed them with the most basic, powerful, honorable, and proper kind of journalism. That's unforgivable.
John, you have been very critical of mainstream media in their portrayal of Julian Assange and not supporting Julian Assange. How ominous is it for them not to support Julian Assange at this point in time?
Randy, I don't think I've been critical of them for not supporting him, because I wouldn't expect them to support him. And I think we have to be careful that we don't feign this surprise. Oh, why aren't they supporting him? Well, they're not supporting him because they're part of, they are the propaganda arm of American power and of British power and of Western power, the very thing that WikiLeaks has exposed. But I suppose what I have tried to do is to point out the hypocrisy of those who claim to be doing a job of journalism, that is, calling power to account and speaking truth to power, if you like, and challenging power. It's not simply amplifying the propaganda of power. There are a number of journalists that claim to be doing that. And that's what I've been most critical of. And that leads us to what is often called the liberal press. In the United States, it's the New York Times, Washington Post, some television outlets. In this country, it's The Guardian. The Guardian is particularly interesting because I think it's probably the embodiment of what I'm talking about. The Guardian actually, as you mentioned in the build-up, The Guardian published some of the most dramatic of WikiLeaks' disclosures, the war logs from Afghanistan and Iraq, which showed the degree to which the United States was conducting a kind of homicidal campaign rather than a war in these countries. The Guardian took, all this was Julian Assange's work, WikiLeaks' work. The Guardian took the WikiLeaks work, won many prizes, including a Pulitzer, and their leading reporters wrote books and Hollywood scripts and made money and so on. Assange, of course, didn't get a penny. Not only that, Assange his usefulness was over. So he was kicked out, basically, kicked out of a club which he never joined, and a smear campaign, which really got going in about 2011 by The Guardian, is something I've never known an equivalent of in my career. Sort of still going on in a way by excluding, for instance, in its reporting of this court case at the moment, of really excluding the significant parts of evidence. But throughout the last decade, The Guardian has conducted the most vicious smear campaign, witch hunt. I can't think of all those other words that describe it, against Julian Assange personally. I don't know how the man has stood up to it. I have known him during that whole time, and personally, I don't think I could bear it. But he has borne it, and his resilience, as those who see him in court will know, is on display. Just a bit. He looks pretty battered, but his resilience is clear and obvious. Now, that's The Guardian, the most enlightened newspaper in this country as it presents itself. A series of smears and fabrications, and the prosecution yesterday, quoting from a book written by two of The Guardian's journalists, Luke Harding and David Lee, who are very much part of the anti-Assange campaign. Harding has made a name for himself, sort of, I suppose, as a cold warrior, producing anti-Putin and anti-Russia material when required. So this personal campaign against Julian Assange is what I've been most eager to show to people, that this was what happens when the press, claiming to be one thing, but is really absorbed into a power structure, as The Guardian is.
Luke Harding, yes. By the way, this is Randy Credico, live on the fly on 99.5 FM in New York City, WBAI.org on the web. We are talking with award-winning filmmaker, war correspondent John Pilger. John, let me say, did you make it to the trial? I understand you showed up, but you didn't get in.
I did get in. I got in, and I thought I was in. In fact, I sat down in what looked like the court, but it wasn't the right court myself. And the editor-in-chief of WikiLeaks sat and stared at a court where there were small monitors in the distance, and we could barely hear. And his patience much greater than mine, so I didn't stay very long. I left. I hope to be there again this week, possibly on Friday. The chaos around this case, such as we witnessed on Monday with people, 6 people as it ended up, 6 people, 5 or 6 people in the public gallery of the main court at the Old Bailey, with plenty of seats around, plenty of opportunities for social distancing. Why? Well, we'd be very naive. In fact, we'd be terminally naive to think there wasn't a reason why. This case is really a serious threat to an order of violence and inequality and exclusion that blights the world at the moment, quite apart from the present coronavirus problem. And what we charmingly call establishments will do everything they can to stand in the way of a victory for justice in this case. But there must be a victory for justice.
Absolutely. We are talking with John Pilger. John, the prosecution in this case, the Crown Prosecutor Services UK, they seem to be getting their strings pulled by the Justice Department representatives sitting directly behind them. Is that the sense that you get?
Well, yes. When I attended last year, one of the preliminary hearings at another court in London, the Justice Department representatives, about 4 or 5 of them, they sat near, just behind the prosecution, and they had a young woman who took their messages and delivered them by hand to the lawyer conducting the prosecution. So they were really directly conducting the case in a foreign courtroom. The judge could see this very clearly, but she wasn't at all bothered by it, it seemed. So they are taking part directly in this. Their incompetence may undo them. That is a very interesting prospect, because they put up, the original indictment had 18 charges, 17 of which were espionage, so basically saying that journalism is espionage, based on a 1917 World War I act of Congress aimed at, I think, conscientious objectors and peace activists during the First World War. They had to dig this out to try and find something they could throw at Assange. And there's an 18th one that has to do with hacking that doesn't add up to anything, really. It doesn't make sense. So most of it is espionage. Now, near the end of June, the Department of Justice called a press conference. That is long after they put in their indictment. The deadline here had passed. Both prosecution and defense had to have their arguments and their witness statements laid out before a certain date. But long after that, they produced something else. And it was like a strange fantasy. It involved a convicted forger and pedophile in Iceland, who they nicknamed the Teenager, who he'd crossed swords as with WikiLeaks. It really didn't want anything to do with him. Long time ago in Iceland, they dug this guy out. I'm not sure. No one's really sure for what reason. Utterly discredited individual. But this was considered to be a new indictment. I mean, who is running things over there? Is it it seems like a version of Alice's Tea Party. But anyway, so the lawyers here don't know really what to do. They prepared a case based on the 18 charges, 17 of which were espionage. They were confident they could demolish this in any proper court of law, I have to say. Then this came along, and it wasn't really an indictment. It was like something scribbled on the back of an envelope. What was it about? Everyone scratched their head, and they're still scratching their heads. They don't know what to do with it. I don't think the judge whose attitude in this case is pretty obvious to anyone who sees her in action, but I don't think even she knows what to do with it.
Yeah.
So where all this is heading, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to say, Randy.
That judge, I've never seen anyone more biased. Even in the Jeremy Thorpe case, have I seen a judge so biased against someone. And here we have, the Crown Prosecutor Services. Are they enthusiastic about what they're doing? Or are they just going through the motions because they have to? What is your sense?
Well, who knows if they're enthusiastic. I think you yourself identified some of the Department of Justice people at the one of the preliminary hearings, and I think I remember you describing them as just a bunch of young suits who really out of law school not too long, just getting on with promoting their own careers. So who knows who's enthusiastic in this? What the force that is enthusiastic is the political center in the United States, whether it's Trump or Pompeo, the CIA, the NSA, whatever. It's that national security apparatus. They are very enthusiastic about putting Julian Assange away forever. And they are in this country too. The Crown Prosecution Service, as you know, in 2013, could have stopped this and thrown it out. The Swedish prosecutor, having promoted a completely fraudulent case of sexual assault against Julian Assange, wanted to get out. And the Crown Prosecution Service has leaked emails released under the Freedom of Information Act to the Italian journalist Stefania Morizzi, showed very clearly they did not want this. Don't lose your cool, I'm paraphrasing them. They said they wanted it to go on. At that point, the whole thing should have been thrown away. Because you've got to remember, it's very difficult for me to make almost rational comment on this, because it is a farce. It is a deeply black farce. But it's a farce. It has nothing to do with justice. I mean, in any proper court of law, these farcical charges, either the first indictment or the Tea Party indictment from June, would have been thrown out by any self-respecting judge. No question about that.
I totally agree with you, John. John, we have 5 minutes left. I want to, Julian Assange very well. People don't know he's been smeared. In a few minutes, tell us what kind of individual Julian Assange is as a human being.
He's a very admirable person. I like him. And when I read comments that he is an unlikable person or difficult or so on, all I know is that he's a very clever person. He thinks strategically a lot. He seems to be, he thinks a bit, he has a sort of permanent chess game going on, I think, because he's a very clever individual. But he's also a very human and very funny. He has a wonderfully black sense of humor. And we actually, when I visited him in Belmarsh maximum security prison, we actually spent part of the time laughing about the happy clappy slogans on the wall. He was telling me about when he was allowed a bit of exercise and there was a sign out there, enjoy the blades of grass beneath your feet. There was no grass. There was just concrete or asphalt. He was kept in a so-called medical wing with some very seriously disturbed people. One of them who kept screaming in the cell next door to him all night. In a sort of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest sense, he made black fun of this. That is extraordinary. And I remember the last time I saw him in Belmarsh, we used to part company, walk away from the visitor's room. He'd be sitting alone. He used to wear this blue prison uniform with a yellow armband, rather sinister thing on his arm. And I'd look back and there he'd be with his hand up and his fist clenched. That's an admirable man.
He really is, John. John, you're an admirable man. You are such a great journalist, filmmaker. JohnPilger.com. We hope to get you back whenever you're available, John, to keep us updated on this process that's going on, this show trial in London and the Old Bailey. And once again, John, thanks for your time with us here at WBAI.
And thank you to you, Randy, for all the work you've done, whereas others have neglected this willfully. You have been there covering it year after year. Thank you for that.
All right. John Pilger, ladies and gentlemen.
When they poured across the border, I was cautioned to surrender. This I could not do. I took my gun and vanished. I have changed my name so often. I've lost my wife and children, but I've many friends. And some of them are with me. An old woman gave us shelter, kept us hidden in the garret. Then the soldiers came. She died without a whisper. There were 3 of us this morning. I'm the only one this evening, but I must go on. The frontiers are my prison. Oh, the wind is blowing. Through the graves the wind is blowing. Freedom soon will come. Then we'll come from the shadow.
Les Allemands étaient chez moi. Ils me disent signe-toi, mais je n'ai pas peur. J'ai repris mon âme. J'ai changé 100 fois de nom. J'ai perdu femme et enfants, mais j'ai tant d'amis. J'ai la France entière. Un vieil homme dans un grenier, pour la nuit nous a cachés. Les Allemands l'ont pris. Il est mort sans surprise.
Oh, the wind is blowing. Through the graves the wind is blowing. Freedom soon will come. Then we'll come from the shadow.